Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're on page 1296. So yesterday we learned the two Alias that are indicated in the Gershayim on the Havayi Chatum Merivo. So one Aliyah is essentially from a Memaleh Kallah to Sovev Kallah, and the second is from Sovev Kallah to the Etzem. So simply two levels of Kallah, Kallah and Kallah Tata, and both of them on the level of Shmoi, because like we said, both Alias, we're dealing with Shmoi. So even though Shmoi is a high level Shmoi HaGodel, to the point that it's even Bli Gvul Ad, but still it's a reflection. The question is a reflection or a reflection of a reflection, as he put it. So this is referring to the first level, the first Aliyah is the comprehension of the soul within a body, or generally the souls of Biyah that are nitfosim begeshem, as he put it. That they relate and they're associate with the empirical, with the physical, I should say, and their avodah is Avdi Hashem begufam. So it's living in a material world, but coming to recognize the divine through their relationship with existence. That's Memaleh Kallah. And the contemplation there is that even the Seichel HaTivi, even the natural mind, can come to appreciate the godliness within creation and is able to understand it. And there's different levels in that comprehension. And you come to understand the divine that energizes existence. You even come to understand that it's only a reflection and infinitely distant from the source of that energy. So Malay Kol Haaretz Kveidei, Kodesh, that God is removed from the energy, like the artist is removed from the energy. He's a higher level than the energy that he invests in a particular piece of art. And the way this reflection is in its source, it's completely nullified there. Bittul betachlis, it only really becomes significant as it's coming outside of the source when it energizes existence. But in Memaleh, he begins headed tfisas makim, like the light of the sun within the sun. And therefore, what does this contemplation lead to? It leads al-kain tichla v'tichsef nafshei licholol ba'atzmus ein. He longs to be absorbed, and he desires his Nephesh to be absorbed and be encompassed in the Atzmus ein, which is removed from the worlds. Additionally, he also added in the parentheses that he understands that the Nevrayim themselves, not just the energy within them, the existence themselves, their only being is only possible to be an identity when they don't feel their source. So in their eyes, they feel like an existence. But in truth, like he says in Tanya, in Sharich B'Amuna, they really are completely only because they only exist because of the energy that gives them life and sustenance. And this all leads that he wants to go out of his yeshus, because this is the avodah from yesh of this world. So even the natural mind can understand that it is not the real source, the real reality of the real divine, and it is not real compared to the reality of its source that gives it existence. Okay. Now, this is the first aliyah. The second one, that also Sovev Kallah, even when we're dealing with the transcendent energy that is beyond existence, is also ha'ara. However, it's a ha'ara Atzmus. Because at the end of the day, even transcendent energy, like we learned, Shmoi, even Yudke, even is already a Gili, and a Gili is always lower than that. And it's also infinitely distant. But now it's a very different experience. Now you're going not from the yeshus, not from existence to beyond existence. You're going even from the transcendence, even beyond existence, to the source that is even beyond that which is beyond existence. And like he said in the parentheses from Torah Eir, that just like the distance from Atzilus to Asiya from Atzilus, even more so is Atzilus distant from its source. So the same thing, that more than Memaleh is distant from the imminent energy, is distant from the transcendent energy, the transcendent energy is even more distant from its source, Atzmus Ein Sof, which, as I said, is even beyond being an artist, even beyond being a creator, even beyond being something that is beyond existence. Okay. That's what he said. Esa Pella, Leisen Nefleis Gdelis, that even a Pella, even Pella, which is Sovev, is also only Asiya. However, this Hasaga is a higher one than the first one. The first one you're contemplating from existence, from the empirical that we relate to. We contemplate, for example, you see the awesome design that God used to create a human body, just a body, or nature. So you have something to hold on to, and you can say, wow, based on that, I come to realize that the God that created this is completely beyond his creation. That the designer is far more is far higher, infinitely higher than the art that he created. That's the first contemplation. This one is Hasaga Shalamayla Mislapshas Beguf, V'Seichel HaTivi. Here, you don't have anything to hold on like that. Here, we are not looking at existence. Here, it's completely talking about even the levels of the divine that are removed from existence. But so Shalamayla Mislapshas Beguf V'Seichel HaTivi. You don't have anything in the natural mind or in the body or in nature to relate to. So this he calls the seichel of the Nephesh Alikis. This is how can we understand something like this? Because the Nephesh Alikis, being a divine soul, like he says in Tanya, chapter 2, it's a chelik elokam emal mamish. It has a piece of divinity in it. Therefore, it has the capacity to contemplate on something that's divine, removed from existence. And even there you come to the conclusion that even that level of divine that's removed is also infinitely distant, even more so than Sovev from Memaleh, Sovev from the Etzem beyond it, from the Helam. And then he elaborated, because the natural mind can only understand things that it relates to. Meaning something that it can hold on to, some handle. Okay, so that's from understanding and that brings the seichel TV, that even the natural seichel can also come to understand that which is beyond godliness, that's beyond the design of nature and the existence. Because Seichel HaTivi works, like I said, like a scientist can come to be in awe of God's mind, as many scientists say they are, but they come to it through science. They come to it through observation, through empirical observation, and through something to look at. They look at something, and from that they derive, as I said, the higher state. The creator is far beyond it. He concludes. I'm reading at the end of the chapter, end of the paragraph rather, on page 1296. Which is in a state that is stripped from nature and stripped from the structures of existence, and also the neshamas that are not nitfis b'geshem. This is the second level, and they're called Evdei Hashem. They serve God with their souls. So in other words, they are essentially looking at things through spiritual eyes, not through physical eyes. So it's not looking through physical eyes and from that coming to spiritual, but it's looking through spiritual eyes and coming to understand even deeper levels of the spiritual. So through this comes a bittul b'mitzias mamish. This is a far higher level of bittul, of absorption. Why? Because now you're not talking from the yesh, coming to realize that existence is, that the design and the art of existence is completely nullified and compared to its source. Here we're talking about even the thing that's a source, even something that is beyond existence, is also completely distant from the etzem, and that's the Kallah of Bittul b'mitzias. It's a higher level of Bittul. So one is basically going from material to spiritual, and one is going from the spiritual or transcendent to that which is even beyond that. That's a summary of what we learned in the last paragraph of the two levels of Kallah. There's going to be one more paragraph where he's going to discuss this, so it's not over yet. And he's going to then go back and explain how these are the two Alias in Avodah. Okay. Does anybody want to ask something? I see that somebody's muted themselves.
Can everybody please mute unless Eliezer, you can ask a question?
Okay. So the next paragraph then, unless somebody wants to ask. Okay. So second paragraph, page 1296, the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. The Yuvan Yoser Ayin Beis Bechinas Kallah, and we'll understand furthermore, or deeper, or more, to further understand, or we'll understand better, or more, these two levels of Kallah that we just described. And he adds in the parentheses, V'cheinu hamashmois b'dibur hamastul b'chofei b'kislav hanal. That this additional explanation he's giving now is what it appears. Mashmois means it appears to be the pshat in the mimer that he cited at the beginning of the last paragraph on 1295. If you remember, he cited Torah Eir b'chofei b'kislav and L'kutei Torah tz'ener re'ena. So he's saying that which he's going to say now is the mashmois, means it seems to be this the implications from the mimer, the Chofei Kislev from Torah Eir that mentioned in the previous page. And what is this additional explanation? He says, the Bechinas Kallah law, the higher level of Kallah. And remember, Kallah comes from the word kiloyin. We use the word absorption, we use the word expiration, expiring, we use the word being encompassed, consumed, all kinds of different words. The Bechinas Kallah ilah, who al yedei his bananus, that this level of Kallah comes through the contemplation, but Atzmus Ein Sof, in the core of Ein Sof, Berememus Atzmusei, in his exalted of Atzmusei, Berememus Atzmusei, its exaltedness, its grandeur is a word I often use on this. Rememus means to be exalted, lifted up. Remus is transcendent. This is a word used throughout Ayin Beis in the context of Kesser. We say the Rememus Hamelech. Well, Hamelech, you say B'shichme Memaleh Gavoyim Kolam. From his shoulders and up, he's beyond everybody. A person that is beyond. You could say that on Melech. Here we're talking about Remus Atzmusei. So we're talking about not as God is one of us, but as God is completely in a different state of being, a reality that's completely beyond us. So he says in the contemplation of Remus Atzmusei, that's completely not in the realm. When you say Eina Begeder, it means it's not just not there. It's not even in the Geder. Geder means you could say it's in the realm, but you're not there yet. For example, the Alter Rebbe used an expression to say a Chochma, that you can't touch it with your hands. Everyone will laugh. If I suddenly said you can't touch the brain intelligence with your fingers, with your hands, you laugh because it's not even in the Geder of that. To say something, I can't touch it because it's beyond me or it's too high up to reach, at least it's in the realm. But here we're talking about something not even in the realm. We learned this before also when we talked about the Helam. That's not even the begeder of Gilui. You could say it's a Gilui, it's in the Geder, it's entered the realm of revelation, but it's very far from us. Here it's not begeder, the erechu begeder, not commensurate and in the realm of Elmas Rishtalshus Klal, v'chol ha'ishtalshus mereish kol dargin, not safe kol dargin, and the entire cosmic order, the entire process, everything from the highest levels to the lowest levels, from the reish kol dargin, the head of the top of all levels, at safe kol to the lowest of all levels, who b'chinas ha'oreh bilvad, is only all it is a mere reflection compared to this level is completely beremus v'isnasus. And I explained yesterday the two types of ways. You could say the finite is infinitely distant from the infinite, but they're still both a set of numbers. They have something in common in that sense. Well, how is it compared to something where numbers don't even exist? That would be like an example of something completely beyond. But Orazu, Eine Atzmus is barach. And this reflection, which means ishtalshlus, all these levels, is not from Atzmus, ki ima b'chinas ha'er v'agili Atzmus is barach. So we have Atzmus, the source itself beyond everything. Then you have a gili of Atzmus is barach, which is Eir Ein Sof. And even compared to Eir Ein Sof, that comes from Atzmus, all of the shtalshlus is only a reflection of that. Like we said before, a reflection of a reflection. It says, in your light appears Eir. So what does this mean? The kol masha nira Eir begili be'elamis, that everything that appears, shanira Eir, that everything that you see in the worlds, even in the highest levels, and that is v'hu b'chinas hakav v'chut, hanimshach me'erein seh baruch hu. The kav v'chut is the first radiating gili after the tzimtzum, so it's the highest level that comes from erein seh baruch hu. V'reishis ha'izgalasu b'partz of the ak, and the beginning and its initial revelation is in the world of Ak. The memenu nimshach v'nizgala b'chol ha'elamis, and from there it extends and it's revealed in all the worlds. Kol zehu ba'ercha lavad, ba'ercha nira eir. So all the nira eir that exists in all the shtalshlus from the highest level of eir, which is the kav, is all this is ba'ercha. We're not even talking about etzem. It's all a reflection compared even to your light. So God gives off light. Light would mean expression, energy, any way you define it. And then from that will come all kinds of levels. All those levels, he says, is ha'ara compared to the Eir Ein Sof, which of course is ha'ara compared to the etzem. So when we say ha'ara, we mean here not even to the etzem. It's that, but it's ha'ara from the Eir Ein Sof, not from the etzem. Aval Atzmus Ein Sof, but Atzmus Ein Sof. Moved the merumam legamri, moved the merumam legamri b'chinas reimus atzmi gam b'chinas ha'er v'agili ma'atzmus Ein Barach. But when you talk about Atzmus Ein Sof, it's removed and exalted and elevated completely in a reimus atzmi, which means not just one that's commensurate, something you could say. One thing is, let's say, on one level, reimus, it's a higher level. Reimus atzmi, it's a fundamentally and qualitatively different state altogether, elevated state, also from the Eir, v'agili ma'atzmus Ein Barach. Also from the Eir and the Gili that comes from Atzmus Ein Barach. So basically 3 levels here. Atzmus, the Eir that comes from Atzmus, and the Eir that comes from the Eir of Atzmus, which is all the levels of Ishtalshlus. So you could say, like, let's take the sun. There's the sun light that's very close to the sun. Let's say that's included in the sun. We mentioned before the light within the sun or close to the sun. Then there's the sunlight as it arrives down below. So the sunlight that we receive on earth is infinitely only a reflection from the sunlight that is close to the sun or inside the sun. And definitely the sun itself is a whole different reality, because the sun is a luminary. The sun is not just light. It's a source of light. It generates light. And then the sun itself is not a good example, because the sun is not Atzmus. The sun at the end of the day was created to give off light. But I'm just using it as an example to show 3 levels. The sun itself, this core light of the sun, and then the light of the sun as it comes and travels down to earth. Now with Atzmus, it's even higher, because Atzmus, Leiza Ikar Atzmus, is not, his inyan is not to give light. Light itself is a optional thing. So but then the Eibishter chooses, Atzmus chooses to express. We said light mitzias nimtza, there should be something that has expression and gili, even if it's a very high gili, but it's a gili. Then you have the level of the Giluyim that come afterwards, all the way after the Tzimtzum, the Kavachut, from the Reishis Dargis, Reish Kol Dargin to Sev Kol Dargin. So he's adding explanation in the contemplation of Kallah Ilah, when we think about Atzmus, that's beyond even Gilui Oyer, even the highest level of Oyer. Ulechein, and therefore, Ani Hashem Leisha Nisi, we say, Ani God, I God, Leisha Nisi, do not change. Not subject to any shifts or changes. The Klolos ha'eres v'agilulim eina esim shinui klal v'klal, because the general eres and giluyim of eir and gilui, the general light and expression or revelation or energy. I'm sorry, the Klolos ha'eres v'agiluim, the general energies and lights and revelations, einim esim shinui klal. They don't have no impact at all. Klal u'klal. Klal, completely, what's the word? I have the word categorically, absolutely, unequivocally have no effect and impact at all. The less machshava tfisa beklal, and no thought can grasp him at all. Afila machshava gduma v'chochma da'ak. Even the primordial, the earliest level of machshava, of thought, and the wisdom of ak, which compared to the existence is like the central nervous system, the blueprint of all of existence. So that's a pretty high level. Everything in existence is encompassed in machshava gduma da'ak, which is that image, skida achas, that one glance, that one picture of all of existence. Even that, less machshava tfisa, nothing can grasp. No thought can grasp him at all. And he's now clearly saying, not just now thought of the human thought, not just thought in Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, and Asiya, but even in Machshava Gduma Da'ak and Chochma Vak. So when a person contemplates on all this, what are we contemplating now? On Rememus Atzmus, that's removed completely from Gili altogether. And that everything in existence is only a reflection of the Gili and doesn't even come close with talking about Atzmus. So he says now, this is the conclusion of this contemplation. Remember the beginning he began. On the second line of the paragraph. So now comes the end of that beginning of the phrase of this section. And with this contemplation, Atzmus Ein Sof. So he's using now Atzmus Ein Sof is the words he's using here. Nase b'b'chinas keloyin. This contemplation causes he will become in a state of keloyin. I would use the word here completely nullified. Ub'chinas bittul ba'atzmus legamri, and his whole being is completely lost. Because we're talking here not just he's saying, okay, I have a little Geir and Gilui, I have some revelation. Fine, I don't have the infinite revelation of Ein Sof as it is before the Tzimtzum, but I have something. Here, we're talking about something that we're dealing with a reality completely beyond us. So what does it cause a person who really contemplates on that in a sincere and real way? That my existence completely has absolutely no significance at all. That's Kallah law. And now he goes back. The Kallah Tata and the lower level of the Kallah, who bizbonus b'bchinas ha'eres v'hagiluyim, is the contemplation that you're thinking about the eres and giluyim, the revelations and the expressions, or eres means light and giluyim means revelation. Revelations. Eich shekol zeh be'ein arech legaba atzmus. How all this is infinitely distant compared to Atzmus. Now, you could ask the question, well, how is that different than what he just said? Didn't he just say that this is that first level? But no, the first level, if you look closely, he's saying the contemplation is on Atzmus, not the contemplation on the Eris and Giluyim and how they're nullified. We're talking about Atzmus that's completely beyond. Now we're talking about the Eris and Giluyim, that all of it is be'ein arech legaba atzmus, is infinitely distant. In other words, you're speaking from the perspective of Eres G'noshai Dezeh, because through this, hu hakiloyin va'atshuka, comes this nullification, or this being, what I said before, absorbed, consumed, Vatshuka and the longing or the yearning. Licholel ba'atzmus erein sof, to be encompassed in Atzmus erein sof. Now, he just says 2 lines here. You have to distinguish this from the first level of Kallah. So the words he used before Kallah is bonus ba'atzmus erein sof. So in other words, we're not even thinking about Eris and Giluyim. You're thinking about Atzmus erein sof is completely beyond. And when you think about that, everything doesn't have any value. Here you're talking about the Eris and Giluyim Abre'ena Reich. So here the chuk is to be encompassed in it. It seems to me that this addition that is being encompassed, he didn't say that before. Before he just said, it's not about being encompassed, you completely lose yourself. There's absolutely no value. The words he's used is bonus azois, Bittul ba'atzmus legamri. He doesn't say that he has a chukka to be encompassed, because that would indicate there's something still there. It means you have a longing. Whereas in this Kallah Tato, he does say that you long to be encompassed in it. But then comes the question, didn't he say that earlier? Let me see. By Kallah, by Sovev Kalalmin, 1 second. Okay, interesting. Yeah. Before he said the same thing. He didn't say you want to be encompassed in it. He just says that you're completely nullified by it. Bittul mitzias. Kallah bittul mitzias. In other words, there's no one left. When you say that I am here and I appreciate the higher levels of the divine and I want to be encompassed, that means you're there to be encompassed in it. Kallah, you're not even there to talk about it in that sense. You're completely nullified. I think that's a clear distinction between the 2 levels as well. So what did he add here that was not said earlier in the previous paragraph? What's the Yuvan Yeser? And he says that's the mashmayis of the Maimer B'Chafei B'Kislev. So I believe it sounds like he's talking on a higher level in the contemplation. Before he spoke about Kallah Tata from the empirical and our natural minds, from the designed universe and all its amazing elements, we come to understand that the Creator is beyond us and we want to be encompassed in it. Memaleh Kalalman. The second, the Kallah was Sovev Kalalman, recognizing that the divine soul doesn't relate to existence. It's just appreciation of Ha'ara Atzmus, how it's only a reflection and therefore infinitely distant from the Etzem. And that caused complete nullification. Here, what he introduced was the element of Oir compared to Erein Sof, and Erein Sof compared to Atzmus. So though there's no question there's a relationship between the explanation before and here, but it sounds like he went to a higher understanding of it because he wanted to introduce how beyond everything is God, Atzmus. So even though he did say before, that Sovev is more distant from Atzmus than Memaleh is from Sovev, but he didn't really elaborate on this distance. And now he has added also the element of Oir and Giluyim, the Ha'ara is only a reflection of a reflection. So I think he hinted to what he says now in this paragraph, in the previous paragraph, but it's more spelled out. I have to read it again to really see what's the Yuvan Yeser. But he definitely added explanation and understanding the 2 levels of how we move from our existence to that which is beyond our existence, and then the beyond, which completely nullified in the presence of Atzmus. That's what he's added here. It appears to me, at least at first glance. I need to read it again, but I just wanted to add that. And now he concludes, and then I'll stop for questions. V'zeu Ayin Beis Alias. And these are the 2 Alias that we discussed earlier. Remember the Aliyah from Zah to Kesser, from Kesser to Atzmus Ha'er, Atzmus Ein Sof, or in before the Tzimtzum itself, the Aliyah from Vavke to Yudke. In the Gilui, it relates to existence, to the Gilui that's to himself, and the second Aliyah to the Helam, from Shmoi to Hu, from the name to Hu. So this is translating Aveda are these two levels of Kallah. So now he's coming back. We said these are the two Alias in Aveda. So now he says, and these are the two Aliyahs. The Aliyah Rishena, the first elevation is going to be Kallah Tata, the lower Kallah, who Abderach Klal is in general Alias. Bechinas Memaleh Kalalman is the elevation of the level of the imminent energy within existence. Shazer B'derech Klal the Seder Ishtalshlus. This in general is the energy of the cosmic order. So of Seder in Seder Ishtalshlus, Sha'ela Ba'atzmus Ein Sof. That elevates and goes up where? To Atzmus Ein Sof, Shalamayla Mishtalshlus. That's beyond the structure of existence. That was the first. So that's Kallah Tata. That from existence, from the divine within existence, you come to that which is the divine beyond existence. Ayin Beis, and the second elevation, he ba'atzmus shalamayla b'chinas Sovev kalam. Now we're elevating to Atzmus that's higher than Sovev kalam and Memaleh kalam. The first one, Memaleh kalam to Sovev kalam, it doesn't say explicitly, but he said it earlier. Now we're going to Atzmus that's higher than Sovev and Memaleh kalam. Because now you're going to Atzmus that's beyond, even beyond the Ur, the highest level of Ur, even the Ur that's beyond existence. Like we learned earlier, these two Aliyahs bring two Amshachas, who Beis Yeridas v'Amshachas. Through this come also, now we draw down from these two higher levels, we draw down as well. Shehem Beis B'chinas Chassan Kaneda. So from the two levels of Kallah, Kallah is from the word kiloyin, being absorbed, going upward, vayechulu, being elevated. That draws down two levels as well, from Atzmus to Sovev and Memaleh, and from Sovev to Memaleh. So that's, and now he calls it the two levels of the Chassan. So two levels of Kallah correspond to two levels of the Chassan. The Amshacha Aleph, hu b'chinas antu chakim. The first Amshacha is the level antu chakim, which means you, hu chakim, you are wise. So even says antu chakim, b'lei b'chachmi yediyah. You are wise, but not with knowable knowledge, wisdom. So he says that antu chakim means that from Atzmus Ein Sof, yumshach extends or is transmitted. Li is b'chinas chakim, comes to a level where there should be chakim, some form of wisdom. V'hainu b'chinas chochma da'ak, v'chochma sheba Kesser b'klal. So generally chochma of ak and a general chochma of Kesser, like we learned in that first of the Aliyah from chochma bina in Zah to chochma of Kesser. Now he's also including chochma of ak, because before he said less machshava tfise b'klal, even chochma of ak. V'amshacha Beis, he milmaila, that's the first level. So we're drawing from Atzmus to even go into the realm of Chochma, of the highest levels of Chochma of Ak, Kesser, and the second Amshacha, which corresponds to the second, to the second Amshacha, which is a lower Amshacha, because first you go, the two Aliyahs bring you one level to the higher level. Now you have to bring down from the highest Atzmus into Chakim, and now Amshacha Beis, he milmaila Atzilus b'Atzilus. From the level of Kesser and Ak, to bring it into Atzilus, into Zah. V'hainu b'chinas moichin de Zah. To bring it now to moichin of Zah, which is already utilitarian and functional and applied wisdom that relates to the emotions of Chesed and Gvura, and which is implemented in our lives. Like we said earlier, Chesed and Gvura, you're already dealing with the interactions and relationships in existence. Alias hamshacha gam b'biyah. And also that the Hamshacha that should also come to all the way into Biyah, to the lowest worlds, like we learned. Like he writes in the Likutei Torah, B'dibra Maskul Shir Hashirim Ha'alef. Likutei Torah, the first Shir Hashirim. So there's a few Maimorim on the pasuk Shir Hashirim. The first one is where he discusses this, and that's the two levels of the Chassan. So we have it now, both the understanding of the actual Alias and the Yeridas Amshachas, but also how it is in Aveda. In Aveda, the Kaloyin of the soul, two ways that the soul can expire. in its longing to be absorbed in the divine, and even more to be completely nullified. And it doesn't have any interest of its own. It doesn't completely non-existent in the presence. Like I spoke a number of times, that ultimately the highest levels where you are in the zone, and you completely don't even feel yourself. It's not even, oh, I cannot wait to be absorbed in a higher reality. That's already a lower level. You're part of the process. And then comes the level with complete nullification. Sometimes the expression is Bittul Hayesh and Bittul B'Mitzias, or Yechud Tata and Yechud Ilah. Doesn't use those terms here, so I don't want to be definitive about it, but it sometimes has a similarity. Where one is, there's a yesh, but it's bottle, it's nullified, and then there's Bittul Mitzias, there's not even a yesh. It's all completely absorbed in the higher level, and there's not even something to talk about the lower level. It's completely nullified or absorbed, however you explain that. Okay, so now let's stop here.
Is Ak Eser Spheres B'Kli Echad?
That's called Akudim.
So what is Chochma de Ak?
Chochma of Adam Kadmon. What? You never heard of?
Yeah,
Adam Kadmon has spheres.
No, Eser Spheres in Adam Kadmon?
Of course. There's Eser Spheres Hagnuzis even before the Tzimtzum. Eser Spheres is 10 divine channels. The first place where they emerge is, it's even a question whether the Kav also has, according to one sheet at least, it's Eris Mitziyarim. It's not yet the Spheres as they are, Eris and Kalim and Atzilus, but it's definitely the beginnings of the Spheres are there. You never heard of the word Machshava Agduma Da'ak? Machshava implies Chochma. There are 10 spheres in Ak, there's 10 spheres in Kesser, there are 10 spheres in Akudim, the 10 spheres in Akudim. And then there's the 10 spheres. When we speak about a structured existence, we're thinking about Atzilus. Atzilus is a full-bodied structure. But as I've explained many times, like the example of a ubar, of a fetus in development, even when you have one cell, it already has everything within it. So he explained that is maybe like Akudim. Akud b'kleyecha, 10 spheres, but Ak has spheres. The question is whether there's Kalim in Ak. Some places it says there are no Kalim in Ak. Some places it says it's the Shadish and the Shamas, the Gufim. In other words, there is something there, but it's not yet, you can call it a Kalim. We talked about this, so really not relevant to this discussion here. The point that is relevant is that there's a shift from Atzmus, where he goes into the world of Eir and Giluyim B'chlal, and there's from Eir Giluyim where he goes into the world of Chakim, of a somewhat of a defined experience of the divine in Ak and a Kesser, and ultimately how it goes into Zah, which is already in Atzilus, from Atzilus and Atzilus. So just like we said, Atzilus to higher than Atzilus, and then higher than Atzilus into the Etzem. And Lifnei Tzimtzum, we learned also the levels. From the Eir Legalis Lezulase, Vavke to Yudke, that's Shmai, and then to Hu, which is the higher level. So we have two general levels, both in Aliyah and in Yerida, and Amshachem.
I have two questions. One is more practical and the other is more conceptual. Let's see. The conceptual question is, we got here by talking about how Hashem Mechatzim Merivav, how the Eibishter, how he defeats the enemies, mean the Grus Kashos, the Katrigim, that come and prosecute with the harsh judgments. And we talked about the need is to rise up to the highest level, Yoshaim, to Alias, etc. And at the highest level, there's no distinction between Tov and Ra. And so we talked about the Alias there.
Between Chesed and Gvura.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you. So the question is, what's the function or purpose of the Yeridus in this context? Because my understanding was that it's going up to that place where there is no distinction in Chassan and Gvura. So the Hamshachas are kind of secondary, if you will. At least they seem secondary. as to the issue of not neutralizing mevatel, being mevatel on the mekatrigim, on the grus kashas.
Actually, not at all. It's vital.
No.
When you're talking very, you said conceptual is a good word. You're talking very theoretical, mathematical. Why don't you use some of the examples we spoke about? The Bnei Elikim are standing before God, and they're challenging the din. Judgment is challenging chesed, and says they don't deserve chesed here. They deserve to be judged. They're guilty actually. So what happens? So Moshe Rabbeinu goes on the mountain and he beseeches God all the way up to get to the highest Alias, one Aliyah higher than the next Aliyah, Havaya, Yechatu the Gershayim, all the way to Yud Gimel Midas Harachim, or all the way to Vayaver Al Ponov, because he needs to reach those highest levels to be able to repair or find the healing and forgiveness. And then if he just stayed up there, it wouldn't achieve the goal. He had to come back down with the second tablets on Yom Kippur and actually say, we've prevailed. Salachti kidvarecha, that the aliyahs that we reach these higher levels have actually saved this marriage. So the Hamshachah, you read the Hamshachah, like he says, if you look on the top of page 1295, he says the Iker is the Gilei Be'elamis. If it remains up there, what's the point? Gilei Alakus, he says, on the top, he says, and he said these words, the words I want to just use the actual words.
Iker Helios Gilei Alakus Balamos.
No, let me finish. I'm speaking. One sec.
Sorry.
So he says like this. The whole point is to bring it back down. To stay up there, you can ask a better question. It's up there before you go there too. What do you need Alias for? You think Atzmus is beyond Chesed and Gvura? The whole point is there's a relationship here. We exist. The whole point, and we grow. Mutva, Murgash, Muskal, we elevate from our levels, from first the natural and reflexive, and then we become the emotional and the cognitive, and all the way up to becoming B'chol Meidecha, complete absorption and consume with the divine. And then the main thing he said earlier was also that you draw down, you don't just remain there. So that's the bottom line here. That's the Alias and the Yuridis.
So the second question, thank you. The second question is more balabatisha. So let's say on Yom Kippur, when I'm davening for mechila, for forgiveness, and he said this highest level, the second aliyah, the aliyah, whatever he called the second, I forget what he called it, but the second.
It's fine. It's all right. Right? Go ahead.
Yeah. So he said this, Sechel TV cannot grasp this at all. It's outside of the realm of thought. It's outside of the realm of our yeshus. So my question is like, how do you know if you're even getting there? You know, it's like,
so there you have to talk to your mashpia and describe what you do understand, what you don't understand, what you relate to. Everybody has, you could ask the same question, how do you know, did you get to the and how do you know you get to b'chol meidecha? Same question. Everybody has to find in their own avodah these levels, where there's a level where you can so-called relate to godliness through the empirical, like I said, through design, from the art. You come to read that. You see God sustains you. We learned that length. When God sustains you. So you bench.
Yeah. Well, the first
and you bench and thank God for, let me finish. I'll explain it. You asked a question. Let me explain it. And then tell me if it's adequate or not. So then, So for example, when a person is eating and they realize God gave me this food, so I'm thanking God, Hazana Sakel, and you come from the food, from life, from health, from parnasa and livelihood, from our families, from so many things that we experience in this world, we come to appreciate the God. Instead of being selfish and just saying I'm a self-made man, it's all my own thing, and by accident or whatever it is, or it's my own success, it's all my own power. You come to recognize that there's a God. God gives you these blessings, and you acknowledge it, and there's a bittul involved in that because you're going out of your ego, and you're expecting, and that's like Kallah. That's a level that is a very profound level because you've made a major shift from the self, you come to recognize. And then there's contemplations that come either from the divine soul alone, where we are now in the realm that's not in relation to us. In other words, it's not as God is sustaining you, but you come to actually appreciate God as God is on his own, not just as God is serving you. Like we learned at length, if you go back, around 30 pages back, he explained at length, how do you go from mutva to murgush and muskul? That's why I've always encouraged everybody to go back and learn earlier. Everything the Rebbe Rashab says here is following what he said earlier. And he's relying that we know what he said. So he speaks there at length, and I can refer you to the pages quite quickly if you want, but you can look it up yourself, especially when he speaks here. I'm just going to go back to the page when he goes over from Midas to Meichen, page 1228, 1229, even 1227. So he talks about there the difference between relating to God as he relates to you. It's like, like a child thanking his parents for what he gives them. And then he starts appreciating the parents on their own, starts realizing that God is something, not just he's here to serve me, which is also a good acknowledgement. You start thinking about God on God's terms. And that's where you don't really have food or drink or parnasa or even the design of the universe to hold on to. Now you have to really be going into God's so-called inner domain on God's terms. And there too, as we learned, there are many levels. So you have to find within yourself these two dimensions where God relates to you through the things that you relate, that you can tangibly relate to, and where you experience God beyond. And each person has their own way of experiencing this. There's no one size fits all. The Rebbe Rashab is talking in general terms. Now, obviously, for someone who's been involved their entire life in learning Chassidus and understanding the highest levels of Ur and even Etzem and so on, they're going to have maybe a deeper experience of the higher level of Kallah. And but everybody has these two dimensions. And I don't know if you know immediately, but that's why you have to have a mashpia who can help guide and also help gauge, where you could see where a person is going from one level to the next. But I don't think we have to be so hard on ourselves. It's just a matter of growing, of thinking, okay, let me think about God outside of me. It's just like, you can think about your spouse and what she does for me or what he does for me. Okay, and you thank them. But then how about your spouse? Not what they do for you. What are they on their own? Valuing them for their own sake. That would be some examples for what this is. And you said balabatish, that's balabatish words.
Thank you.
What you said is, B'chinas haneshama, you're getting though. It's not seichel.
It's not seichel TV.
Not
Seichel of the
seichel TV.
Nephesh.
Not seichel TV. Also, Rabbi Simon, who is considered a seer legabe Atzmus? Because he said before that Omo in Muflo b'chinas a seer levad legabe Atzmus. This is including who?
Here it doesn't sound like that he's talking about who. Here he sounds like that actually Shmoi is Asiya legabe who. That's what it sounds like to me if you think in context. He didn't really speak here about who legabe Atzmus. He talked more about Oyer, Shmoi legabe who or who. Remember, who in this highest level is Yechelis Atzmus. So here he's talking definitely the levels of lower level of Shmoi to the higher level of Shmoi, and then how that all bottled to who. Or in the lower levels, Chochma bin of Z to Chochma of Kesser, and Chochma of Kesser legabe lifnei tzimtzum. But I don't think he's talking about who legabe Atzmus, and that's another discussion about where the Helema Atzmi, how that relates to Atzmus. He may talk about it later. If not, I'll address it. I don't want to address it now because that's not what he's not talking about who and Etzem now. He's talking about everything lower than who, all the way leading to, because who, at the end of the day, he did describe as being the first Aliyah. The second Aliyah is from Shmoi to who. So you can't say that who, that would be a third Aliyah, from who to Atzmus, which he doesn't say here. So that's why I'm careful in he spoke like this: Havai de latata to Havai de laelo, and then Havai de laelo to Lamayla Mishmoi. Who? That's the two Alias here, for sure. That's for sure the case. Hu and Etzem, right now, Hu is very much like a reflection of the Etzem being completely beyond. As a matter of fact, I think he even said earlier that Hu is higher than Memaleh and Sovev, which just seems clearly the level that we're, this is the highest level right now. But I'm sure he's going to come back to it. Because, and for now,
Avaya is also a part of Shmoi, right?
Avaya Tata is a Shmoi. It's a lower Shmoi, and the Avaya Leil is also Shmoi.
Rabbi Jacobson, I have a question.
Sorry, Havai Delatata is Avai and Zah, and Avai Leil is Avai higher than Zah. Kesser or Avai and Atzmus Finite Tzimtzum. I mean, look, let me put it this way. There's a lot of details here. If you want to wrap your head around it, you got to go back and read it a few times to see how it all comes together. I mean, I'm trying to do that as I speak at all these levels, but this is pretty consistent. Keep in mind, he's talking on two tracks: Atzilus to higher than Atzilus, and higher than Atzilus to Lifnei Tzimtzum. And then the higher track is in Lifnei Tzimtzum itself. You Vovke to Yud Havai and Atzmus, Vovke to Yudke and Yudke and Vovke Havai to Hu. That's higher than Shmoi. Just these two tracks he's talking about as well, and then there's of course the two Yuridis.
Rabbi Jacobson, I have a question to ask you. I understand all the levels that you're talking about. Like, in other words, first of all, you put it very beautifully, things that are so esoteric into words, and that's not an easy task. My question to you is this: when we're talking about reaching those highest levels, even as you said yourself at Kriyat Yam Suf, that we had to reach Moshe Rabbeinu had to go really high, But how do you reconcile that with a sentence that says, "I, God, do not change"? So if Hashem is not changing, well, obviously He's not. But how do you reach to those levels to change and overcome the geburot at that level if He's not changing?
You're drawing down the level that doesn't change into the world of change. Chesed and Gvura is a world of change. We could have Chesed and Gvura. You want to draw down from a place that's beyond change, that is beyond Chesed and Gvura, into the Chesed and Gvura. Ani Hashem Leishanisi is a level that transcends all of the structure of Ishtalshalos. If you can access that, you can then come down to a world where there's Chesed and Gvura, Din, and say, no, we're going to forgive, or we're going to tikkun, we're going to repair, we're going to heal. That's the point. You're drawing from a place that is fundamentally connected, that a Jew is fundamentally connected, that's higher than change. You want to draw that down into the reality, into the world of change. That's how I would put it.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll stop here. End of the paragraph, the middle paragraph on page 1296. Any other questions?
Yeah, I did have a quick 3 little questions. One, kavachut. I forget what the difference is between kavachut. The Rabbi mentions it here. What's the difference between those two?
Kavachut is the same thing. It's just 2 words used in Eitz Chaim. Kav means a line. Chut means a thread. So it's a line and a thread. It's just 2 expressions that Rizal uses. In most of Chassidus, it doesn't really go into explaining the difference. Essentially, it's a stream of consciousness. It's a stream of light, like a laser beam, which is a line. Kav emphasizes that it's like a line, and chut emphasizes like a thread, a very thin kav. Actually, the expression is kav dak kotzer. Kav dak. It's like a thin, narrow line, and chut. Chut could also be used because it's like, in a way, God is threading existence. It's like an embroidery. So it's like the thread that he uses. The Rebbe speaks about it in Machat, the needle and the thread, in the context that the kav is also in a way like the needle and the thread that you use to shape all of existence, like the paintbrush I mentioned.
Oh, that's good. The needle could be with a kav, and the thread would be the.
I don't know if I ever saw that. I'm not sure if that's the case, but definitely chut for sure. It means thread. So
right. Wow, that's a beauty. That comes back to the artist analogy, so to speak.
Right.
Second question is, when it says above,
also just I should add, and that becomes the central thread that threads through all of existence, so it connects everything. Also, like the main thread. It's like the main artery, like the main pipeline.
Right. Very interesting.
And even in the
Okay.
human body,
This
like
is
the
amazing.
spine,
Right.
and then it branches off into many nerves and all the different things. So it's like the main artery, the main, like the trunk of the tree, or different examples that you can use, the kav, and then it will branch off. Chassidus talks about that. It's like a river that then branches off to continue giving, literally like the human body. There's the main arteries, and they branch off into the veins and the capillaries, etc.
This is amazing. This is your explanation. I never understood why kav the hood, but now it's
Yeah,
amazing.
that is really something.
This
That-
is your
that
own
really-
analogy.
Is that your own analogy, Rabbi? I've never heard that. That's amazing.
I can't reveal my trade secrets.
Wow.
Let me put it this way. It's
Needle
not
and
my own
thread.
analogy. No, it's not my own analogy. It's based on a few places where the Rebbe speaks on the Mishnah, the end of what we say by Yartzeit. You know, the Mishnah that we say by Chodesh Matzalosh, not Chodesh Hamachat.
Machat shehin suno. Machat
right.
shehin suno al
Mahachet
malaskim.
Shehina Sunnah, a needle. And so the Rebbe's father actually explains it al pi Kabbalah, the machat, the needle and the thread, and the Rebbe explains it al pi Chassidus. So there they explain the kav chut in that context. I took it from there. I don't know if I've seen anywhere it says that it's actually like a thread through all of Atzilus, but
Needle
based
and
on
thread.
that, it's pretty much you can pretty much imply that. I would have to look exactly. There are Maimarim that definitely talk about that it's like they talk about the road, that there's the main highway and there's the roads and the little all the like a main artery, and from them branches off. There's for sure discussed that, but not there. It's not in the context of thread. But yes, you could say like an embroidery. You could say that. I will also say I took it a little from Kabbalah of Rabbi Yisrael Sarug, where he introduces in Emek HaMelech the concept of the luvush, the malbush, the garment, where he talks about lifnei tzimtzum and after the tzimtzum like a garment, and that the garment was folded over. They use garment. If you look at the Maimer Vayhi ben Seya Aaron Tafrei Samach Tes, the Rebbe Rashab talks about that, the garment. So taking all that together is more or less where I derive that from.
So that's not the same thing. Kav and chut are two different things. But
Right. It seems like a
No, I'm just saying the analogy of a garment, and listen, to say that the world is like a beautiful tapestry. Or that, so I've not seen that anywhere, but it definitely resonates, because remember, existence is a design, beautiful, whatever you want to call it, a symphony. You can call it a tapestry, you can call it a narrative, a book. I mean, or a piece of art. There's so many ways you can describe it. I mean, the artist and art thing I've not seen. That is a muscle that I think I did not plagiarize. But remember, a lot of these examples that I give, that ones that are not Chassidus, are more that resonates as a very good example to capture the ideas. Obviously, no example is perfect, but
no, but the kavachut, the thread and the needle, shows that one's like more like a keli and one's more like the or, because the chut is the thread that the keli is bringing, the needle brings the thread, is a vehicle for bringing the thread to create the tapestry.
you have to look at the Rebbe's letters and sichos on this topic, and the Rebbe's father. I think he talks about this maybe even to some extent.
Wow.
I don't remember right now.
Okay, that's very interesting.
Because if you have the kav only and you don't have the chut, you're not reaching the purpose.
Well, there's also expression the kuda kav partsuf. We learned in Ayin Beis volume 1. The kuda, a dot, kav is a line, and partsuf is a structure.
Yes.
What are the other questions?
The other one was ha'ora. When the Rebbe says how that it's nivdal lagamre, that we're talking about bechinas ha'ora bilvad, ha'ora zu en atzmusa yisbrei ki bechinas ha'or begili ba'atzmusa, that it's higher than all seder Aristoteles, which is ha'ora from I guess Shmo. But my question to you is ha'ora. If Or Ein Sof lives in Or Ein Sof or Atzmus Or Ein Sof or who, is a whole, that all of this ishtalshlus is just a ha'ora from that, meaning that if that is a ha'ora from Atzmus itself, Atzmus Alain, that it's itself. So if we're a ha'ora from a ha'ora, that would seem to mean that yes, it's very far away, because we're even talking about that from the aura from the level, but it would seem that we still have some type of connection to it, because ultimately you can trace back all these auras to Atzmus itself, which I thought is, if it's in the totally different getter, how could Or Ein Sof or Atzmus or Ein Sof or Helama Atzmus or Helama Atzmi, how could that be aura from something that's totally out of the getter of anything? How could it be reflection? It would be a yesh ma'ayin. There would be a complete disrupt, a complete disconnect, because if it's totally out of this getter, there would be no ha'ora from it.
So
I would think.
Chassidus asked this question, and it answers, and we learned it also in Ayin Beis, that the truth is Oyer is just as distant from Atzmus as Keli, and just as distant from Atzmus as Yesh. And in that sense, everything is Yesh Ma'ayin, because Atzmus is built to Mitzias Nimtza, and is not closer to Oyer than he is to anything else. But
Or to who, right?
Once the Eibishter chose to emanate Oyer, he chose to express himself. And he said, I'm going to give properties to Oyer that will allow it to reveal part of me. Whereas the Yesh will not reveal part of me. The Yesh will reflect the Mitziusim Atzmusei, the feeling there's no source. But as far as really experiencing godliness in an awareness and consciousness, so Oyer, from the point of view of Atzmus, Oyer is as distant as everything is. Right. But from the point of view of Oyer, it doesn't have any other identity but to express Atzmus. And Yesh expresses itself. It's not interested in expressing Atzmus. So bottom line is, essentially, Oyer ends up having properties because God gave it the Me'ein HaMoyer element. So it's true. On one hand, it's infinitely distant. On the other hand, it's a carrier of God's instructions. It's like Torah. God is created something to carry his instructions or to carry his energy into existence. So on one hand, we have to realize that we're all infinitely distant from Atzmus. But at the same time, he does want a relationship with us. Remember, he wants a relationship. So that's why he did it through Oyer. Oyer would carry some of the Gilui. Then it would go down to Laurel. So it depends what you're talking about. If you're talking about the element of us recognizing that God is a much higher reality than we are, then that's the focus here. If you're talking about that we have a relationship with God, then we're talking about how God is being revealed to us. And you need both.
I have a question that relates to Parshas Truma. I mean, just coincidentally, it touches on the theme. The question is related to the text. It's just incidentally, I think, thematically related to Parshas Truma.
Just before you go, 1 second. I also refer you, Eliezer, to page 1270. And in the paragraph Al Pizeh, he explains some of what I just said in different terms of the difference how Oyer expresses godliness and how Kalim express. I think it will be helpful also in this context. So you have to always just keep the balance. It's an important question and important discussion. That's the brief answer. Okay, go ahead.
And one second, I had the third one. Yitzhak, I just wanted to finish the third one. When it said that, and we just learned that even it's separate from the even it's not makshava. You can't face a low face make kwal. Even makshava hakdumadak. What does that mean? How could makshava hakdumadak is God's thought? It's not. It has nothing to do with our thoughts. So what you mean? God at that level can't even conceive of the highest level of God?
We don't say God. Godliness as it manifests in Chochma is infinitely distant from God as he's beyond Chochma. What's wrong with saying that?
No, because who's doing the consciousness? Who's doing the thinking?
It's a godly energy that manifested after the Tzimtzum.
Right.
So yes, it's a godly energy, but when someone creates, when a brilliant author writes the letter A, he's writing the letter A, but what is the A comparable to all his brilliance and who he really is? It's not even in the same domain. So yes, God created Ak, and He created Chochma. But if you compare Chochma to like a drop in the water of the entire ocean, or even beyond an ocean, that's what it means.
Right. But it's sort of a level of God's self-reflection, godliness self-reflecting at the level of Machshava Keduma Da'ak about, can't even self-reflect about that pristine, separated, elevated level of godliness that it can't even conceive of. But it's a level of godliness doing the conceiving. Can't conceive of it. I understand he can't conceive of it, but it's there's no independent entity there. The only thing that's conceived is thinking. That Machshava Keduma Da'ak can't, is godliness not be at that level, can't be able, it must be, because who else has consciousness at that level? But God, an aspect of godliness. So that aspect of godliness is not able to conceive of the ultimate level of godliness, I think. So it's self-reflection there. I just never heard that concept before. Self-reflection, godliness, self-reflection, so to speak. Seems okay.
Eliezer, not all of your thoughts can encompass who you are either. You may have a thought, but it barely expresses who you are. You can't think about all of who you are in one thought. But that's just an observation I'd make to try to tell you.
I'm not thinking about that question about the level of ability of it. I'm just thinking of the etzem of who's doing the conception, who's doing the thinking, who is thinking, and there's no other independent entity at all that has consciousness.
Right, it has to be God.
All right. So that's what I mean.
Right.
So it's God, that level of even the Rebbe says, I can't even conceive of this level. So he's saying that my godliness is being, as Rabbi Jacobson just said, being expressed at that level. Godliness there is self-reflecting, but can't self-reflect up to that level. That's what.
No, but I'm saying, just like you can't self-reflect who you are, you can self-reflect about parts of you, but you can't have a self-reflection about what constitutes all of you. I mean, I'm trying now. For once, I'm using a muscle. I don't know if I'm on or off, but I think it works. Anyways.
Okay, you know what?